You know, there's only one thing I could really say that was bad about episode 2 of Skate. And it wasn't even the anime's fault, it was just the playback where I was watching it on Funimation originally, because I actually had to delay the subtitles because there was about 3 to 4 seconds ahead of time with the actual episode, so it kind of forced me to have to sail the high seas, download it, go to VLC Media Player, and delay the subtitles by about 4,000 to 5,000 milliseconds. But otherwise, this episode was damn tight, I have to say. I love this episode, and I'm sure this won't be as talked about as, say, the first one, just because anytime you get the new episode of any new series, that will always gain more buzz. And a skateboarding anime, I do think will be more under the radar from a lot of the sequels and isekai series, the fantasy series of the season. But I think episode 2 impressed me more than even its debut episode. While it was a lot of setup, you could say, because we have Langa trying to learn to skateboard, because even though he did quite well in his race last week, he was skateboarding in a way that's really non-conventional and not something he'll be able to do forever. While there is ways for him to have his feet attached to the board, which he ends up designing a longboard, which has a little bit of feet holders so he won't fall, but you'll actually be able to jump off the board, which will save his life need be. I did like how this was him over 2 weeks learning to do an ollie. That's all it really was. But for someone who went from snowboarding to now skateboarding, while there is fundamentals that will transfer over from one to the other, I think they did a great job at really showcasing why this will be a big struggle for him, because being attached to the board is a lot different. The fact that he starts bleeding when he falls down on the pavement. In snowboarding, he gets bruised or broken bones, but the idea of scraping your hands and stuff really isn't going to happen unless you smack a tree or something, which is pretty rare, all things considered, at least if you know what you're doing. So the idea of traditionally having 2 to 3 months in order to do an ollie, it makes sense that he would be able to do it in 2 weeks if he was really dedicated and put everything into it, especially considering that he had a custom board made. And I like this episode for that, really just seeing Reki and Langa kind of bond over the episode, because they really feel like two people who have known each other for eternity. But when you have a passion that's quite similar, and it's basically the love of boarding, whether it's snowboarding, whether it's skateboarding, you're going to have a natural connection. And it was really great to see something not try to be overly plot driven, nothing like that. It's literally just two boys enjoying the thrill of the board, getting into trouble, trying to learn, crafting your dream board as you're also propelling the whole skating rink, which is kind of like this underground skateboarding ring where you have the most menacing looking guy ending up working at a flower shop in his day job. And I love that how they all have alter egos and things like that. It just makes her a more anime style story. So there is going to be the intensity, and there is going to be more episodes that will be more talked about and more sought out because look at this insane move, or look at this insane animation. But for an episode that most people might brush aside for being set up, I think it did great for characterization, really putting the focus on what happened to Langa and his parents, because we always see the mother and father in a picture, so clearly it wasn't a divorce if they're still keeping the family portrait up. Well, we learned that the father ended up dead, and even before transferring over to Japan, he gave up snowboarding because clearly his father was probably the one who was kind of the one to encourage him to pursue that passion, and once the father was dead, probably lost that passion. But I think the characteristic that I like the most about Langa learning in this episode is actually the reason why he wants a job is to help support his mother, because they want that financial security, and he's worried that she may not be able to do it herself. She originally grew up in Japan, so that's why they ended up transferring. It just really felt like within an episode they really clarified a lot that could have been seen as was this convenience? Why did a Canadian randomly move to Japan, and why did the mother randomly move to Japan? And it just makes little sense. And to see that moment of bonding where for 2 weeks he's trying to do an ollie, failing time and time again, I mean, there's a lot of cute moments building up to that. I think one of my favorite shots, if not my favorite shot in this episode, is when they're reading on the rooftop and they have one of their skateboards with the ketchup and things like that, and they just pass it along. They roll it to the other when they're trying to dip their fries in it. It's just a really cute moment, and they're just totally in sync, and they don't need to do much to understand what the other needs. It really just feels like two people who grew up together. I think it goes to show just how tight their connection already is, and we can already tell how tight it will be by the time we reach that final episode. But the idea of talking about why he came to Japan and what he's kind of pursuing and why he wants to be a skateboarder now, as he completes his first ollie, sure he falls, but he does actually do it. I thought it was great to see that, especially considering there's a big difference when you're snowboarding doing an ollie versus skateboarding. You actually have to lift your feet up, and with snowboarding you're always attached. So just to see what he was struggling with but continuing to pursue it time and time again, it really did show the determination to make it feel like not someone who's naturally going to get around this very easily because he's a snowboarder. He's going to have to work his ass off, but he will struggle, he will fail, but he will always rise up again. And there was some great comedy that from the sidecast that I wasn't expecting, the mother looking at her son wondering if he's getting bullied, trying to finally answer, like, okay, no, I'm gonna ask the question, I'm gonna figure out what's going on. And he's like, oh, I fell. And she's like, oh my god, he really is being abused. And it's just like, they don't last too long on the joke, so it makes it all funnier when he does clarify his skateboarding, but still, it brings a grin to your face. It's just such a funny show, but it also is fine just being two teenage boys trying to skateboard, one who's already pretty good at skateboarding, another who probably will be the best, if not one of the best, in this kind of like underground skateboarding ring, which I wouldn't be surprised eventually if the police come in and crack down on it, because it does feel like there's got to be some illegal maneuvers being there, like whether it's betting, whether if like they're doing too dangerous of stunts for their age, there's got to be something going on. But then again, only time will tell. I just think Skate has a lot of potential to be a sports anime that I'm still not sure if this is going to be one that's going to be incredibly popular this season, but if it isn't this season, I do think over the months, over the years, I do think this will be a show that will be looked back upon, even if it's just for its production visuals, which you've already seen what it's capable of with its insanity that we've seen. I mean, in this episode, we got an intelligent skateboard that can predict the moves that you have to do. So there's going to be some insanity with the boards, and everyone has their own custom boards. And I really did like that Langa went with a longboard because it is much more natural. That's what I prefer to use myself. So I like that about the show, is how it really does feel like, even if you don't know too much about the sport itself, it does feel very easy to follow, and the more you know, the more you appreciate about it. It just feels so good, and I think over time this is going to be one that will really gain a big following. Maybe it'll be a cult following for now, but over time it definitely will prosper into something quite glorious. I like this a lot. I think the characters are really funny, and they made me like both Reki as well as Langa equally in this episode, whereas last week I was more fond of Langa. I think their bonding was great, and I love the family dynamic on both sides. I'm always a big sucker for any sort of like silent montage, and they had a great moment to pass these 2 weeks, because personally for me, I actually originally thought it was going to be like 2 months, because that felt like the most natural thing, maybe a month at most. But when you do get the confirmation that it was 2 weeks for him to do this ollie, I did like seeing it, because it did feel like a lot of time did pass. He had more and more bruises, more and more failures by the looks of it, and there's a lot of goofiness, you know, running from the teacher because they're skateboarding in the hallway, eating lunch on the rooftop, watching skateboarding videos on their phone behind their books and things like that. I think in terms of like a silent montage with just music playing as you're watching clearly a lot of time passing, I think they did one of the better jobs I've seen in recent memory of making it feel like a lot of time passed, so we don't need to watch episodes for him to get to that point. That would be boring. But having one episode where only a handful of minutes are dedicated to that time passing and elapsing, I think they did a great job at symbolizing that, you know, we're not going to waste time here. We only have so many episodes, so we are going to take the time to flesh things out where they need to be, but we're going to make sure you always have fun. So maybe every other episode we have some insanity, where the other episode will be something more setup characterization, which would make the show have really tight pacing, which clearly they're aiming to do based on these two episodes. Insanity with episode 1, slower pace but characterization episode 2. Insanity next week, probably not as much insanity with episode 4. I like that type of pacing, and I hope they stick with it, because I think it will make everything feel a lot more fleshed out than just a pretty skateboarding anime that people might pass us off as. So I can't wait to see episode 3 next week. Let me know your thoughts and feelings down below. What did you think? And where do you think it might go with the challenge that was kind of dropped at our boy's feet at the end of this episode? Do you think he's going to completely win, or do you think he's going to fall flat on his face? Because personally, I think he'll probably fall flat on his face. Let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, share your support, and hit that subscribe. And if you have been new around here, so until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.